Good evening, friends. It is so wonderful to see you all this evening, and to be here with my very good friend Christy. Christy and I spend a lot of time together these days, as you will hear about in my introduction of them. So my name is Wendy Cooler, and I am the convener of a funny little project called the Friends Incubator for Public Ministry. The Friends Incubator is a project under the care of my meeting, which is Sandy Spring Friends Meeting in Baltimore yearly meeting. And we have a very, I don't know, it's a very big goal. Um, and that is to firmly put the responsibility of care and accountability practices for public facing ministries back in the hands of the local worshiping community from which the public minister has come. And so, what that means right now in our first year of existence, or we're just finishing up our first year, we established a fellowship program that currently is for the East Coast of the United States. We have an active cohort of four monthly meetings from four different yearly meetings participating in that. And we are rebuilding over a 2 year period capacity for discernment and skills around supporting and holding public ministry accountable in those meetings. We also have a lot of public events like the one you're at this evening that are always free to attend, though, of course, donations very welcome. Um, we plan to be expanding in the next year because we just received a massive grant from the Shoemaker Foundation that we're really happy about. And it's very affirming that the work in our pilot year was as necessary as we thought it would be. And Kathleen Wooten has just arrived. She is a member of our advisory board that consists of friends from all over the Quaker world. So, I don't want to spend too much time on us. You can find out more about us at friendsincubator.org if you don't already know about us. I want to introduce you to Christy Randazzo, Dr. Christy Randazzo. Um, and Christy is a theologian, a Quaker theologian, and an eco-theologian, as you might know. They have a new book out published in 2025. I just included a link to it in the chat, Divine Ecosystem. Um, this is a kind of translation of Quaker theological concepts because, yes, friends, we do have theological concepts using creation metaphors that are grounded in a complex ecosystem of experience, testimony, interpretation, and shockingly, emergent doctrine. Um, we are also writing a book together, which is why we spend so much time together. That is also set to be published by Fortress Press. It is a book for the entire church about what the church can learn from the Quaker practices of public ministry and our special interpretation of where ministry resides. So, with that, I just want to turn the presentation over to Christy.
It helps when you turn the audio on. Um, Welcome, everyone. It's great to see you. We're going to be diving into an evening of storytelling, um, interpreting the meaning of stories, and trying to think through what our own stories are. I want to start tonight with a a moment of waiting where sort of silence, but I want if you can, in this time, um, gather an image in in your heart, in your mind, in somewhere that you feel you can connect to, as we are spending the next sort of minute or two, about what um, how you would experience the presence of God. or the presence of the divine, or the presence of the energy that gathers all of the universe together into itself. Um, what might that look like? What stories would you tell to try to describe that? What metaphors would you use to explain what that feels like? So just sort of sit with some of that for a while, and we're gonna um, have some time of silence, and then I'll jump in and start from there. All right, friend. I always wonder what it would be like to be a non Quaker watching one of these videos where suddenly there's just like dead air for like 2 minutes, just randomly, Um, yeah. Anyway, so what I want to talk about today and want to tell the story of, is my own experience of being called by the divine into ministry, and how that call has um, changed and shifted and fallen over the rapids and gotten swirled under the maelstrom and popped back up, from the water spout and landed on the ground somehow. Um, so I want to say, sort of give an arc, and we're going to do that through um, five specific stories that I'm going to tell, and each one has an image or metaphor connected to it, and some of them have a Bible story, specifically a biblical passage connected to it that I want to sort of describe. Because I'm going to describe the experience of feeling the divine presence the way that I do, and how that's impacted my own understanding of call and ministry. Um, because I believe that one of the true gifts of the Quaker tradition is this sense that we have this inherent balance between the individual and the community, where the individual has the autonomy, the space, the expectation to rise into ministry in some form in their community, and each person, what that form looks like is going to be different, from person to person. But that idea of each person having something, some kind of call, some unique sort of space where the divine is leading them. Um, but that is sort of captured and held in a tight relationship in our communities of faith, our Quaker meetings, our churches, um, the spaces that you have where you feel that you are connecting to the divine, and that work is sort of filling you and bringing you together as a community. Because I want to break down the idea, from the outset, that we only experience God in certain ways, in certain settings, and that ministry that sort of emerges from that, the ministry that we might be called to, must look a certain way or feel a certain way or be bound by some kind of vision of a hierarchical structure or something. And it's not just that we're Quakers who reject hierarchy because we are Quakers, and we know we don't actually reject hierarchy because we have our own forms of hierarchy amongst ourselves. But this idea that we know what ministry is and we know how God is interacting with us, and that we can oftentimes ignore the call of the divine, the voice of the divine. How oftentimes do we not think something is real, is not really speaking to us, or may not actually be from the divine, because it doesn't fit the translation of what we think it should feel like. It should be, the Prophet Muhammad, Muhammad, sorry, praise be upon him, in a cave somewhere. It has to be huge when it can sometimes be the actual sound of silence. So I say that, and the context that I want to sort of dive you into first is my context today, right now, this very moment. Because right now I can hear the noises of my family who just returned from a Ren fair that they spent all day in. I couldn't attend because I was preparing for this and a variety of other things. So in honor, I'm wearing chainmail earrings that I got at a Ren fair several years ago. But right now, today, we moved a kid into our house that needed a home. Um, this is the second time that we have had somebody that we didn't know really come into our home and move in with us. But we've had people all over the years, friends and friends of friends, and pretty much generally queer because I look out for my people, but people who needed a home, a space, a couch for a time. Um, but what's different now is that we have two children who've joined us, two 18-year-olds who've joined us in the last year now. And this is our second one this morning. And we were a house of three in our family, and now we have five people. And I don't know. There is no end time for when this kid who's joined us might leave us. Normally there's an end time, 2 months, 3 months, a time on the couch for 6 months, what have you. So the open-endedness of this is new to my spouse and I. And it is a call that we both have felt together. But as opposed to other calls I'll tell you about over this evening, this wasn't a call that we received as, like a feeling which I often get of the divine, going like, okay, pay attention. This was a calling of circumstance I want to describe. Because I want to start off by, first saying what I mean when I say that the divine calls us. And basically, I fundamentally mean that we are presented with circumstances in our lives where we are led to do either, one way that is going to move towards, you know, justice, good, love, what have you, or another way, which might possibly be doing the same. We're not oftentimes, facing easy choices between good and evil. Ooh, I'm going to work for, I'm going to work for ICE, or, I'm going to work for, I don't know, Goodwill, like, I mean, it seems like an obvious kind of split, but it's not. The call is complicated, at least how I've experienced it, because it is something which emerges from who you are, where you are in life. And there are circumstances that we discover we are almost drawn into over time that we don't really have much of a choice. In a sense, almost like if you catch the tide moving in to the shoreline, it is really hard to get yourself out of that. And you reach a point eventually where that's it, you're stuck. You are going in this direction. Um, I think that when, we have moments, like now, where we were going to potentially have this lovely young person, needed we were it was going to be for a few months, just in the interim between moving from this house to the other house, what have you. But last night she was kicked out, and just like that, at 9:30 at night, God's knocking on your door, and how do you respond? Now, I think what I also want to preface this with is this idea that um, this isn't something where you are on no expectation, you aren't prepared. This kind of call is not, like suddenly it just sort of knocks on your door and it's right there. We've been thinking about it. We've been talking about it. We prepared for it. We are, we doing this kind of thing for people for years. It's something that my spouse and I knew that we could do. Um, we'd already done the work to be ready when the moment struck. And I think that's the difference is, we can all be called to be present to the divine presence in the world around us. But it is a steady preparation every day so that when it does present itself to you, I mean, no one's ever ready for it, but you're more ready than not. So that's what I think of actually in many ways as sort of the Platonic idea, the Platonic ideal of like a divine call is the world spoke, there was a need, and you were ready in that space. And I'm not saying, we're amazing. In fact, I don't like that. I don't understand why everyone isn't doing it. Um, that's how I truly believe. You know, this isn't something that anyone is doing, for any other reason other than how can you have a kid, a queer kid, sleep under a bridge somewhere? It's just not acceptable to me. So I was ready for it, and in that space, it was there. But I bet there's a number of you, possibly maybe everyone here, who's had, that moment where suddenly it, it was ready. You were ready. In that moment, you could just make the decision to take the risk, because ministry is a risk. Take the risk to be in relationship in some form with people that's going to change you. So that is what a call is at core. Feeling as if you have been prepared, you've been, preparing yourself to listen to the divine, speaking to you. And then the divine goes, okay, it's time. And you go, okay, well, here's towels and a toothbrush. So I think I want to start off with this idea that I think that calls are mundane. Calls are domestic. Calls are not amazing. You might have a moment of, Job in the maelstrom, God talking to you, but you don't have to. That's not the point. If you're listening for that, it's not going to come, as, Elijah discovers, and we'll talk about that in a little while. So, what call is at core, the beginning, is something where we are all ready for when God says it's time, whatever that looks like. So, I want to start off from there. So, the first story I want to tell you about is the moment that I realized that I was actually talking to God whenever I was a child and talking to God. Um, because there's this old sort of canard, I guess, where they say, "Does a fish know that it's wet?" Right? I've had this weird sense that I've always labeled as the divine. I feel like there's something there. Have always, felt that when I needed to reach out to something, um, I just trusted that something was there and I just kept talking. I never expected that I was going to get some kind of big response. I just knew that, when I was a kid, I was deeply, terribly bullied, and I knew that I could talk to God because my grandfather told me God's always there, and I would just talk in my brain, just sort of, okay, well, and I don't even know if it went anywhere. I just felt as if, why not? I'll try it out. And the more that I talked, the more that I felt that something was listening, and I can't describe how that was. It really was, in this sense, just the breaths that I made, um, the beats that my heart did. It was just who I was. It's just what life was. I was told I could, I did, and there we go. Now, I'd always had the sense that, maybe God's going to talk to, me in a different way. Because I heard about other people who'd had that experience. It's not that I expected it for myself, but I just knew that it was possible. But um, I distinctly remember when I was in high school. I had been heavily involved in the Catholic church that we were raised in, youth group, the whole deal, and I even worked at the church. And one night, um, someone came up to the space where I was sitting because I basically locked up the church after all the meetings had left. I cleaned the place and I looked after it. And they came up to me, looked me right in the eye, and they said, you should be a priest. Now, I want to say, for those who were not raised in the Roman Catholic Church, particularly in the Roman Catholic Church in the 20th century, someone asking somebody who obviously is going to be read as, a boy, a man, in some form, regardless of whether I understood that. Um, Obviously, they're going to look at me and go, "Oh, well, of course. Have you thought about being a priest?" Because every Catholic everywhere is thinking, "Well, that would be a great potential job for you, be a priest." And so this happened to me with some regularity. And but this one moment I thought was shocking because I had no idea who this person was. It was creepy and weird, honestly, and the problem is that the next week something like that happened, someone I'd never known. The next month something like that happened, and I'd never, and I started to get this weird feeling that God was trying to say something in the most creepy way possible. And I didn't understand why God wasn't just, telling me. Eventually this sort of died down, and I moved to University of Texas where I went to college. And I was going to be working for the government, and I was going to save the world by being eventually the Secretary of State. I did not have small ambitions then, and um, I remember having this sense of feeling as if this was right. This was what my life was going to be like. Exactly, exactly. That's the right response. Laughing about it because I just knew it. I knew this is what it was going to be like. And then something happened to me. And distinctly remember I was sitting in a movie theater watching Romero, the movie with oh, now I can't remember his name, but about Oscar Romero from the 80s. Raul Julia. There we go. And I was watching it on campus for a class, and I was in the middle of the movie, and I just had to get up. I had that sense of quaking that if you've ever felt it in a meeting where everything is jumping and antsy. I think this is the first moment I've ever had that of that absolute that sense of quaking. But I'm 19 and a Roman Catholic at this moment, and it's 1999, and I know nothing about the Friends. And so I'm sitting here and I have to leave, and something told me God wants to talk to me. I don't know what it was. And so of course I go to the Catholic Church, the Catholic chaplaincy there. And I ask the chaplain about this problem I've been having, this feeling of like God keeps knocking on the door, and then I wait and I'm not hearing anything, and God keeps waiting. And then the the priest just looked at me and said, "Well, then why don't you just shut up?" I was like, "Wow, thank you, Brother Ian of 75 years old, who just laid that stuff out for me just flat out." And I was like, "Okay, thank you. I needed that. That was a cold, hard slap in the face." So I go into my dorm room and I have this feeling of unbelievable presence. And in that moment, I understood a story I'm going to tell now. We're going to remove ourselves from my dorm room and we're going to place ourselves on the Mount of Olives on the night when Jesus was praying and was then betrayed, and of course, the night before the crucifixion. And when when I was younger, like I said, I always had this sense that like I could just sort of talk to God because God was there. And for me, the Jesus that was most palpable to this day, most sort of right there, most alive, was the Jesus from Luke 22, verse 39 through 46. And that's right after Jesus has left the Last Supper and has walked up to the mount, and he has his disciples, and they're following him because he needs to pray right now. So I'm going to read it out for you briefly. He came out and went, as was his custom, to the Mount of Olives, and the disciples followed him. When he reached the place, he said to them, "Pray that you may not come into the time of trial." Then he withdrew from them about a stone's throw, knelt down, and prayed, "Father, if you are willing, remove this cup from me. Yet, not my will, but yours be done." Then an angel from heaven appeared to him and gave him strength. In his anguish, he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat became like great drops of blood falling down on the ground. Now, you may not know this, but that's the New Revised Standard Version. That was the version that I read when I was a kid. And there's a there's a space in verse 42 where he says, "Father, if you are willing, remove this cup from me, semicolon. Yet not my will, but yours be done." Semicolon. Now, what they don't tell you about a semicolon is that a semicolon holds time. It's a pause in time. You can have two sentences that are pulled together, and then the semicolon is there. And the semicolon asks you to wait. Take a second, pause, and then you move on to the second part of the sentence. So for me, this right here, this semicolon was Jesus. This is the essence of who Jesus was. Jesus says, "Father, if you are willing, remove this cup from me." This is not the Jesus that I was told who somehow, like, you know, arrived from heaven, was nailed in the cross, died, was born again, and then went back up to heaven. This was not the Jesus that didn't live and breathe and bleed and feel and be depressed and feel betrayed and have all these emotions. These real emotions that I had my entire life, this sense that the divine understood that if I was Jesus, I would be saying, "God, take this away." It's not, it sounds so poetic. Take this, if you are willing, remove this cup from me. No, I imagine Jesus literally sitting here going, "Holy crap, I am frightened beyond all possibility of belief. Please, please, just no. Could we anything? No, I'm not ready." And the semicolon, when I was a kid, the semicolon told me I could make that last as long as it needed to. There was God's self going, "I don't want to do this. And then he does it anyway. But he didn't want to. God is saying, I don't want this. So the ability to say, I don't want this. This sucks. This job you've given me, this task you've presented to me. I've always thought that you can argue with God. Maybe I was, Jewish in that regard. And I remember Abraham and I love that Abraham just kept trying to whittle down the people in Sodom. Just save them, please. And God's like, okay, fine. And that's the same God that I see here in that semicolon. Jesus saying stop. But the ability to have that argument, that connection. So that's the experience I had of the divine and my understanding of the divine going into this moment where I'm in my dorm room and God is going, okay, talk to me. You've been avoiding me. It's time. And for the rest of the evening, I yelled, I cursed, I I used every word that Samuel L. Jackson has ever used in abundance at God. I tore at God. I told them where they could shove their ministry. Um, and in the end, I said, fine, we'll see where this goes. So for me, I've always experienced a call as something which should be real. It should be wrestled. It should be stretched and pushed against. So I want you to we're going to take another minute of totally dead airtime. And I want you to imagine, um, or actually not even imagine, let's do this differently. Sit in your body. How does it feel when I tell you that you should argue with God and that maybe you should curse God out occasionally? How does it feel? Where does it feel? What's it bringing up in you and why? We'll just take a minute. All right. So once I got this call that I was as certain as I could be about that God was talking to me, um, I then followed that path for a while. Um, but what I want to state is that I don't know if you've noticed, I didn't actually say what path that was. I assumed it was ordination. I assumed that God was saying, come follow me towards a ministry in the priesthood. That was the language I was using. Um, so I was speaking that language, and so God spoke back to me in that one. And that's how I started this journey of feeling like I am, okay, specifically following a call, something specific that was unique to me. Now, I did this I followed this for most of my 20s. In fact, probably all the way up until I turned 30. I was trying in some form or fashion to be a priest in the Episcopal Church because for a variety of reasons, I decided rather rapidly after getting this call to the priesthood in the Catholic Church that I was going to be an Episcopal priest and not a Catholic one instead, because I wanted the family and I wasn't willing to give that up. And I didn't feel like that was what God was calling me to do. So I wound up in this space where I was consistently being asked to be available, be present in these spaces where I wound up. I first started volunteering at Episcopal churches, working with youth, um, and I really thought that ministry was really important to me. I felt that God was leading me there, and it also worked with the fact that I had a great youth experience when I was a kid. I wasn't bullied at church. Um, so I wound up moving to a city for my first youth ministry job, then moving to another city for my next youth ministry job. And I did this for a while. And I kept trying to crack um, in the process in the Episcopal Church. It's known as the discernment process, or discernment for ordination, where ministry is built around the idea of either having one of three paths, where you're either a priest and you follow in that path, or you're a deacon, where you are, sort of serving the church, but you also have a life out in the other world, the outside of church world, or laity, which is just everyone else in their idea. So there's these three separate paths, and they have their own specific callings to them. And so if you're in the Episcopal Church, you have to keep defining why this calling specifically, as opposed to any other. Now you don't have to do that if you feel a calling to the laity, but if you feel a calling to the clergy in any way, either being a deacon or being a priest, you have to prove it, and you have to keep proving it over and over and over again, through the longest interview process I think I've ever been a part of. You have one interview, then you have the next interview, then you have the next interview, and then it keeps going up and it keeps going up, and anyone can stop at any point in the process and go, we don't feel like this is right, or you need to pause, or wow, we've discovered things about you that we should never have you anywhere near a cloth again. So like it's designed as a way of discerning where you are in your own journey towards the ministry. But what winds up being the practical effect is that you just simply have to keep you know um, I guess interviewing for a job that you don't have, that you still have to go to college, grad school for another 3 years in order to actually get. So you're interviewing for a possibility for 3 years of then getting maybe a job after that. So it really is, discernment is built really entirely around trying to bring you into this stretch, this way of being, this way of doing ministry. So when you feel any kind of sense that doesn't align with that understanding of how you should go through this shoot towards this one specific kind of ministry, it doesn't work out. Now, the thing that kept sort of keeping me from being called, and everyone that I ever was in this process with said, yes, you are called. We affirm you every step of the way. We affirm you. You're doing great work with the kids. This is who we would want. But could you stop talking about how much you think gay people should have rights? And this was before I realized I was queer. And I just was like the most ambitious ally ever. I should have probably maybe seen the signs and, paid attention, but whatever. So I was certain that I was called because I was told, yes, you're being led to ministry. This is obvious. We're seeing it. But it doesn't fit this institutional frame. We're not ready for it. We don't think it is right. We can see how you think it's right, but it's not. So it was this consistent finding out where the limits and boundaries were in this one specific church community, which I'm certain that any of you on this call have your own experiences of, bump against the boundary of a religious community. So that's not that this is unique to me. In fact, what I want to say is that it's not unique to me. I know many people who've gone through the same kind of process who felt that God did not have any ministry for them in any way because, for any number of different reasons, the people that they were interviewing with could not see, they could not experience the ministry. They didn't understand it. Um, so one of the challenges, I think, when you get involved in public ministry, and I say public ministry as anyone who is publicly saying, I am doing the work of God. That's it. If you are doing it and you are doing it with an intent to be doing the work of God in public, then you are a public minister. But when you're in this process of trying to continue to change an institution that maybe you don't actually fit into, what you find is you get chewed up and spit out many number of different ways, ground down, shaved off. Um, and what I began to experience after over and over and over and over again is this idea that is present in the translation of the Catholic Bible when I was a kid, the New American Bible, but that was not in all the Protestant versions because, well, um, Protestants are prudes. But in the book of Jeremiah, what you have is a prophet, Jeremiah, who is called by God in a powerful call story, unbelievably powerful. I mean, lifted up into like heaven and shone. I mean, he is overwhelmed by the experience. He has very much said, okay, there we go. God talking to you. And then he goes through possibly one of the worst experiences as a prophet anywhere. It is terrible for the guy. He does not have a good life in any way, shape, or form in terms of anything enjoyable. I think he had a good life, but I don't think he liked it very much. And so there's this moment in the middle of the text where it's normally labeled as like Jeremiah's interior crisis, but it's Jeremiah 20. And I remember reading it when I was a kid and thinking, oh, that's unique. And I'm going to read the Catholic version for you. And then I want to sort of return to why this is notable. Okay, 27. You seduced me, Lord, and I let myself be seduced. You were too strong for me, and you prevailed. All day long, I am an object of laughter. Everyone mocks me. Whenever I speak, I must cry out. Violence and outrage I proclaim. The word of the Lord has brought me reproach and derision all day long. I say, I will not mention him. I will no longer speak in his name, but then it is as if a fire is burning in my heart, imprisoned in my bones. I grow weary holding back. I cannot. Yet I hear the whisperings of many. Terror on every side. Denounce. Let us denounce him. All those who were my friends are on the watch for any misstep of mine. Perhaps he can be tricked. Then we will prevail and take our revenge on him. But the Lord is with me like a mighty champion. My persecutors will stumble. They will not prevail. In their failure, they will put to utter shame, to lasting, unforgettable confusion. Lord of hosts, you test the just, you see mind and heart. Let me see the vengeance you take on them. For to you I have entrusted my cause. Sing to the Lord, praise the Lord, for he has rescued the life of the poor from the power of the evildoers. Cursed be the day on which I was born. May the day my mother gave me birth never be blessed. And if you want to read a pretty powerful complaint, read the rest of that chapter, which again is Jeremiah 20. Jeremiah is describing the experience of being called by God to do work that was going to put him in public, that was going to make it challenging for him to be amongst his people because he would bring difficult messages to them. Okay. He describes it as in the original Hebrew, it could be seen as rape. Now, one time that I was able to sit in on a seminary class before I actually was able to go to seminary much later on in my life. Um, I went to a class at Virginia Theological Seminary because I was a good Episcopalian from the South, and that's where you go to seminary if you're a good Episcopalian from the South, and I visited it. And the class was exegesis, Old Testament exegesis, and it was about Jeremiah 20. And right then and there, while I was doing my visit to learn about the experience of being a priest, or at least learning to be one at seminary, is this passage where Jeremiah is going, God, you overwhelmed me. You seduced me. You enticed me. The New International Version says you deceived me, but that feels too weak. No, 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 no. This is, God like pulled you in, suckered you in, and put one over on you. Jeremiah is not holding back. And I understand that feeling. I understood that feeling. And the very last time that I was going to be up for the like you only have so many chances before you put your head against the wall. And the very last time that I was trying to make it work, going, please think of the future, think of other people who might disagree with you, please. Let a queer ally in. I remember the very last time I got a phone call one night, and it was the priest who was my boss, who, I mean, we were great friends, and he was really supportive of me. And he said, I'm very sorry, it's done. I would never be a priest. And it was if somebody had cut my strings and I collapsed on the floor. That's happened to me 3 times in my life where I just completely just fell apart. Um, and that moment of feeling untethered, that moment of feeling, what did you do to me? Um, I know that. And I know many people who feel a sense of call, which is, by the way, where the title for this presentation comes from, this idea of, was I seduced? God? I think we have this feeling sometimes that a call it looks a certain way or it feels a certain way, um, or it has to be managed a certain way, or what have you. And we get disappointed. We are harmed if we do the work. We are overwhelmed. We are forgotten. We might lose people for the work. And then we go to God and we go, what did you do to me? Did you seduce me? Did you rape me? Did you overcome me? Did my call compel you in some way to treat me like this? And that took me a long time to get over. Um, and what helped, and again, I must say, I am a quite biblical literate FGC Quaker, which I realize is kind of a semi-oxymoron at times. But um, I really do have passages come to my brain at moments. And I distinctly remember I was in church and we were reading this passage, and I felt as if I understood what ministry was finally. And this was sometime in my 30s. I'd already become a Quaker by that point, become convinced, and was moving towards finding something else to do. By the time that I had that final last, cutting of strings, I was entering grad school, and I could just feel the sense that this was where I needed to move into. It also helped that I was just really good at it, and it was there. But that was where the opening that happened once priesthood ended. Um, but it was ready in the moment, in the space when it needed to be. Um, I saw that it was a possibility. I saw that it could be God talking to me. And I said, okay, I will walk in that direction. the more that you've done that, the more that you can do that, but it doesn't get any easier. All of us, as I'm certain we all know, these moments of walking in faith. Okay, I'm going to trust that he loves me and I will marry him. I'm going to trust that, this move is going to be worthwhile and I can get a job and that's a career. I'm going to trust that we can have this child. Um, I'm going to trust that I still have a few good years left in me, whatever it is. So I remember, like I said, in my mid 30s, I was trying to figure out what I was doing. Being in school was a good moment for me to sort of take some time and reflect on, you know, um, the first 20 plus years of my life were devoted to whatever God told me to do. And now, God was saying, "You're fine, brother. Figure it out." And I had to learn to do what Ezekiel does. So, not Ezekiel, sorry, Elijah, the other one. Elijah, the other prophet. Um, Elijah is a prophet during the time of the Queen Jezebel. Oh, of the famous Jezebel, how dare she be all the things, representation of everything that is bad of woman and whatever. Okay. That's the image of Jezebel, right? So King Ahab is just spitting, ready to kill Elijah because King Ahab and Queen Jezebel are trying to revive the some of the more Canaanite practices that existed before, or at least existed, at the same time as the worship of Jehovah or El, that then became Judaism as we understand it. So they were trying to bring back some of the old stuff, and Elijah was going, "No, don't do that. That's no." And they were in this long, locked horns situation for most of the end of the book of First Kings. They're in this wrestling for chapter upon chapter, and there's this moment where Elijah basically says to the other people at the space, the other prophets, Jezebel's prophets. There's this contest, and basically, who's going to be, whose God is bigger than your God, right? And well, God, Jehovah God wins. And then Jezebel is pretty ticked off because Elijah doesn't, of course, just go, "Ha ha, I won." He then slaughters all the priests of the other god. Okay, so, all right. So you slaughtered the queen's priests, and then guess what? She's pissed off at you. And so he tears off, just tears off, frightened of all, get out because he's like, "Oh my God, I'm gonna die, I'm gonna die, I'm gonna die." And he is like, I got to figure this out. I got to talk to God. I got to talk to God. And I have to have an answer. God's got to tell me something. I have to be called and spoken to. I need to know what's happening here. So he's running and he goes for a day and then he's again, "Oh my God, this is awful. This is awful." He meets an angel and the angel, says, "Well, here's a tree and here's some food and here's some wine." Basically, get some rest, have some food, drink some wine, take a nap. Just take a nap. All right. So then Elijah wakes up after he's been refreshed and, then soldiers on to, the mountain of God. And then he goes up to the mountain and verse 11 of chapter, where am myself here? Yeah. So we are at 1 Kings 19, verse 11. "Go out and stand on the mountain before the Lord. The Lord is about to pass by." And this is Elijah on the great mountain, waiting to hear God. And there's a great wind, so strong that it was splitting mountains and breaking rocks in pieces before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake. But the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire. But the Lord was not in the fire, and after the fire, a sound of sheer silence. When Elijah heard it, admittedly, the irony of hearing the sound of sheer silence, but never mind. There's an inherent paradox in there. Obviously, note that. Um, when Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his mantle. Just basically, you can't see the face of God, or else, anyone who's seen um, Raiders of the Lost Ark knows what happens when, you know, the ark is opened and your face melts off. Okay, so Elijah is trying to keep him, self becoming a melty face, and so he has this thing across his face, and he went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. Then there was a voice to him that said, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" And then Elijah basically goes on to say, "I've been zealous for the Lord. I've been doing this and this and this and this. God, they're chasing me. Arr! Why?" And then, of course, God says, very end, basically, "Okay, here's what you do. I think it's time for your successor." So he says, "Go to here, go here, go here, go here," and then ask for a guy named Elisha. So Elijah, at that moment, at the end of his ministry, he goes to God and he's like, "Talk to me." And he's expecting the divine in all of this. And the divine presents themselves in not absence, in stillness, in peace. But that peace that happens like when you walk outside after the snow in the winter and you can just, everything is hushed. There's that sense that there is palpable something there, but it's hushed. And Elijah feels that hush. And once he feels that, he realizes that all of his images of who God's going to be big. God's going to, do this great thing. God's going to tell me to do this amazing thing. I'm going to be a priest. I'm going to be saving the world. I'm going to be doing what have you. I have these ideas. And God goes, "Hush, take a breather. I think it's time to retire." And in that moment, that retirement, what he says is he allows Elijah to be human. And he opens Elijah's call up to this much wider space. And he says, "Stop thinking about me in terms of power. I am not an earthquake. I am not this. I am not this. I am not this. I exist in the quiet." Now, what that means is I exist everywhere. I exist in that quiet, which is the quiet of the universe, the quiet of the cosmos. I exist in that everywhere, which is the quiet of the bottom of the ocean. I exist everywhere that is the quiet of the quantum realm. I am at all levels. So if you just think of me as power, then all you're experiencing me is as a human. So when I read this sometime in my mid 30s, I felt as if the dams had burst. And I realized what we as Quakers are about. And that is seeing the ministry in the spaces where others don't. Being the ministry in the spaces where others aren't. And being open to a call that is not going to come how we expect. Now, what I wanted to end with is let's take another 30 seconds of completely dead air time and um, think about how would you respond to the divine in the moment of sheer silence? How would you respond to the divine in the moment of sheer silence? Thank you, friends, for your time, for your presence, and for your listening. Wendy.
Thank you, Christy. I'm going to stop the recording, and I'm going to ask those that are staying for the discussion portion um, to just give it another minute after I stop the recording for us to sit together.